So ladies, I have another devotion for you today, and I call this dependence. That comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and it's verse 30. And I needed to be reminded of this. I really did, so I thought I would do a devotion for both of you ladies about this. But this is a verse that I think is very parallel with what Paul would say in the following chapter, that's 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. Where he was pleading with God to take this thorn away from him. And again, we don't know what it is. I think it's probably the fact that Paul had to live with the memories of all the people he put to death, of seeing them dead, of seeing them being killed. And he had to live with that. And it was God's will not to take perhaps the pain of that away from Paul. And this verse right here, though, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 30, Paul says really much the same thing, but in a different way. He says, if I must boast, I love this, I will boast in the things, get this now, which concern my infirmity. And that is 180 degrees out of kilter with the way most of us think, with the way we're raised, and even with the way things are in our churches. We're not built to boast about things that bring us down, but that's exactly what Paul is saying here. This isn't a new convert. This is Paul probably 20 or more years after he's been converted. And so he's lived life for a good deal of years. He's probably, 60 years old or more at this time. And he's come to the conclusion, I think really, that the things that truly help us to grow in Christ are often the things that wound us the most. And so Paul is saying right now, if I boast in the things that wound me. I boast in my hardship. And the question is why? And it's very simple. Because it's those things, those unthinkable things that God chooses to allow into our lives and maybe even bring into our lives, like he did with Joseph in the dark night when God allowed Joseph to find his brothers. I think he sent an angel there to tell Joseph where his brothers were for the very reason or purpose of Joseph being thrown into slavery and then being sold into Egypt. Because he had to grow up. He had to have those things in his life, that difficulty, to help him to depend upon God, because that would be what would save both the Egyptians and the Israelites, you see, during the hard years of famine. And I dare say that we have the same thing in our lives. We have years of famine, though they may not be literal years, but God is in the process, and you both have to understand this, of wanting us to depend upon him. And often suffering is the only way for him to really accomplish that. And so Paul understands this dynamic. And so he's gotten to the point in his life, and we need to get to that same point where we understand that the sufferings, that the hardships that maybe even God doesn't take away from us are often there for the purpose of driving us to him, because that is ultimately where the blessing is. That's ultimately where the real foundation is. This is a short but sweet devotion. God bless you both.